On December 3rd, 2016, at Sony's PlayStation Experience press conference, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was officially unveiled to the world. As of producing this video, many details about the game remain unknown, but it was an announcement many fans of the cult fighting series thought would never happen. And as an extra bonus, the previous game in the series, 2011's Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, was brought back onto the PSN store. Yes, if you weren't aware, all versions of Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and its DLC were unceremoniously delisted a few years prior. And those weren't the only casualties. But the unveiling of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite also brought hope that these dark times were over. If you're wondering, well, how did we get here? Well, you're in the right place, because this is Past Mortem, where we break down and explore the stories of video games, and we're gonna take you for a ride through the wild, twisted history of the Marvel-Capcom partnership. Before we begin, a note on media licensing. In the rough and tumble world of transmedia empires, one IP can be ported off into separate mediums. Oftentimes, to help with the cost of producing content across so many mediums, a company will license the rights to another company to produce something like, say, X-Men on a TV show, and another company to produce it for a movie, and another company for, say, a video game. Because they are different mediums, they are legally distinct from each other, and if that sounds messy, it's because it is. Licensing rights are a huge part of the Marvel story and why the Marvel vs. series came into being. Our story begins in the early 90s, long before the Marvel brand was the dominating pop culture force it is today. At the time, Marvel did not have the resources to make video games themselves, so they looked to other companies like Capcom, who were enjoying a near dominance in the fighting game genre after basically birthing it with 1991's phenomenally successful Street Fighter II. To say that Street Fighter II was a cultural milestone would be putting it lightly. However, Capcom's success bred many worthy competitors. In order to stay on top, the company needed to evolve its games. It was this competition that drove them to refine Street Fighter II over many iterations and create new titles like Darkstalkers. While this was happening, Marvel was enjoying a successful media expansion of the X-Men, a Saturday morning animated series, an arcade brawler by Konami, a pair of successful Sega Genesis games, just to name a few, made characters like Wolverine, Storm, and Cyclops household names outside of the comic book world. This led to the first collaboration with Capcom and Marvel, 1994's X-Men: Children of the Atom, the true origin of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. The game not only featured lesser-known Marvel characters like Omega Red and Silver Samurai, it showcased a more outrageous playstyle that stood out from the pack. Characters varied wildly in size, could jump 3 screens high while performing air juggles, had enormous screen-filling special moves and supers that could be performed quite easily. For Marvel, it proved to be another successful project for the X-Men. For Capcom, it proved to be another successful hit in a still ballooning market. Afterwards, Capcom expanded this unique style of fighting game with a direct sequel in 1995 with Marvel Superheroes. After that, the Marvel vs. series was born proper with X-Men vs. Street Fighter in '96, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter in '97, and Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes in '98. Each game ratcheting up the series' trademark insanity before culminating on the magnum opus Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes in 2000. Thanks in part to an arcade-perfect port for the Sega Dreamcast, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in particular would be an enormous cult hit, especially in the competitive fight scene. By most accounts, it is an unbalanced, broken mess of a fighting game, but its staggering roster of 56 characters and 3-on-3 combat gave fight fans nearly bottomless possibilities. Despite being the 6th entry, when fight fans said Marvel, they meant Marvel vs. Capcom 2. For years, physical copies were a highly valuable item. It would have one of the longest streaks in the world's largest fighting tournament, Evolution, technically debuting when the tournament was instead known as Battle by the Bay. But that's getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Before Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel was in big trouble. In 1996, due to unwise investments in things like collector's editions, stickers, and Toy Biz, Marvel Enterprises went bankrupt. During the years that followed, the reformed Marvel Inc. licensed out the rights to several of its IPs in order to make some quick cash. Deals like this saw Fox with the movie rights to X-Men, among others, and New Line Cinema with the rights to Blade. While these deals made some money in the short term, they were essentially ripoffs for Marvel. For example, while Blade made $70 million at the box office, Marvel made only a reported $25,000 off the movie. But what does this have to do with video games? Well, in October 1999, after Blade, but before X-Men, Marvel Inc. licensed out the video game rights of those 2 franchises to Activision, and then followed up with the rights to Spider-Man 2 years later. This would result in games like X-Men Mutant Academy, and give Spider-Man and Wolverine cameos in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 and 3, respectively. But this also meant Capcom became unable to produce more entries in the Marvel vs. series, though Capcom did support Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for a few years, porting it to the PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2000. 2002. They also kept themselves busy with a new series of versus games with SNK, though none would match the cult status of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. In 2005, Marvel started making some big moves that would put them on the trajectory towards becoming the media juggernaut we know today. Though shakily recovered from their bankruptcy just 9 years earlier, Marvel decided to risk 10 of its most profitable characters in order to receive funding to make its own movies. Merrill Lynch agreed to give them $525 million over 7 years for them to make 10 movies and open a studio. But Marvel decided to make it even more complicated. A couple months after this deal was finalized, Marvel regained control of its Iron Man franchises from New Line Cinema, which happened to be a favorite character of Marvel Studios' CEO and CFO. Unfortunately, they were not able to use Merrill Lynch's money to make an Iron Man movie because it wasn't a part of the collateral characters negotiated in the deal. That meant Marvel needed to raise some money for the movie's $158 million budget pronto. Among other things, this saw Activision renew their contract with Marvel, securing the rights to Spider-Man and the X-Men through 2017. They also formed other video game deals around this time, like selling the rights to Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, and Thor games to Sega in 2007, the Marvel Superhero Squad rights to THQ in 2008, and the rights to a Marvel MOBA to Gazillion in 2009. Meanwhile, back at Capcom, the decade saw the video game company suffering through highs and lows on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, and as the next generation of consoles rolled around, fighting games would find themselves in a bit of a slump. Though the competitive fighting scene was steadily growing, interest in fighting games among the greater gaming community was at an all-time low. This is sometimes referred to by fight fans as the dark times. However, 2008 would mark a comeback for fighting games. The digital release of Super Street Fighter II Turbo HD Remix that winter proved to be a massive hit for Capcom, but it was all an opening act for the next big title, Street Fighter IV, which was released on Xbox 360 and PS3 February 2009 and sold millions worldwide. 2009 was also a banner year for Marvel. The unprecedented success of Iron Man the year prior and the beginnings of the Marvel Cinematic Universe led to a deal with a little-known company you may have heard of called the Walt Disney Company. On August 31st, 2009, Disney announced a plan to acquire Marvel for $4 billion, a deal that wouldn't officially be approved until the end of the calendar year. Proved to be quite a successful deal, though it would bring a number of complications to Marvel IPs in the following years. Now, before this deal was announced, things couldn't have been better for Marvel vs. Capcom fans. In the fall of 2009, Capcom re-released Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on PSN and XBLA, featuring, for the first time in North America, online play. According to Capcom's website, these digital versions alone sold 1.4 million copies, and the good news kept coming. In April 2010, Capcom announced Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Fate of Two Worlds, the first brand new chapter in the series in a decade. Released in February 2011, the game was a hit and would receive an expanded edition, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, released in November later that year. It's unclear exactly how this deal for Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was able to go down, especially since many of the characters on the roster were supposedly tied to Sega and Activision. Activision in particular was set to have its rights up until 2017. This hints to Disney possibly buying out contracts or modifying deals in some way, though details of this are not public. We reached out to several people at Capcom, Activision, and Marvel, but received no comment due to various NDAs, so who can say? But either way, Marvel vs. Capcom was back. And it was a glorious few years for Marvel fans, but the changing tide of business deals began to show in 2013 with a few coinciding events. First, the release of Disney Infinity, the often unprofitable Disney Interactive's entry into the then burgeoning toy-to-life market, and second, the digital removal and, in some cases, recall of several Marvel video games. Activision's numerous X-Men and Spider-Man games, Konami's X-Men arcade game, but also PSN and XBLA versions of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Hell, even the iOS version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was delisted, and we never even knew that game existed. I would have loved to have had that on Punching Weight. And this was all a year before the PT debacle. All hail the dark future of digital stores. Now, it may seem odd to discuss the Disney Infinity games in a video about Capcom arcade fighters, but it's important to note that they were developed by Avalanche Software and produced by Disney Interactive, Disney's in-house interactive media studio. This was a rare occasion of Disney foregoing licensing and themselves entering the video game scene on their own. Disney Interactive, however, was notoriously unprofitable before Infinity, losing the House of Mouse $1.41 billion between 2008 and 2013. However, Disney Infinity, which cost an estimated $100 million to produce, finally dragged the division out of the red. Released in August 2013, by January they had sold about 3 million starter packs. After the fact, though, it seemed that Disney was initially too conservative with the production of its Infinity figures, resulting in too many buyers and not enough toys, aka too much money left on the table. But that was 2013, when many other Marvel games were still available. The success of Disney Infinity, coupled with the reacquisition of rights from various publishers, paved the way for 2014's Disney Infinity 2.0, which featured Marvel characters. But despite Marvel Mania at the box office, 2.0 was not as successful as 1.0, with Disney Interactive's game division reporting an $88 million loss in revenue from the prior year. Infinity 2.0 figurines cost more but sold less than 1.0 figurines. Definitely not the recipe for financial success. Also, Club Penguin subscriptions were down 2%! Ultimately, Disney would later tell their investors that 2.0 was unprofitable because of, quote, inventory obsolescence. The hell does that mean? Well, according to a Kotaku article written by Patrick Klepek, it's fancy talk for, whoops, last time we made too few toys, this time we made too many toys, whoops! In other video game related news, 2014 also saw another casualty, the removal of Marvel vs. Capcom Origins Collection, which was delisted from XBLA and PSN at the end of the calendar year, only 15 months after release. Developed by Iron Galaxy, it was a lovingly crafted collection featuring arcade-perfect ports of Marvel superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom 1, complete with tons of extras and bonus features, like a host of challenges and the ability to play the game as though you were watching over someone's shoulder in the arcade. How crazy is that? But with its removal went the last piece of the Marvel vs. games. At the beginning of 2015, not a single game in the Marvel vs. Capcom franchise was available for digital purchase, with most Marvel games also still missing in action. Yet by July, Activision's Deadpool game would reappear on PSN, XBLA, and PC digital storefronts before receiving an HD port in November. This was no doubt to coincide with the theatrical release of Deadpool the following year in February 2016, though it is an interesting anomaly since Marvel usually tries to not promote 20th Century Fox's Marvel movies. This possible sea change in Marvel games availability happened around the release of Infinity 3.0 in August 2015, which was able to ride Force Awakens hype to officially become the best-selling franchise in the Toys-to-Life market, making $200 million in 2015, more than Skylanders and LEGO combined. However, this still reflected a loss from Infinity 2.0, a fact that's even more damning considering that 3.0 had exclusive console rights to the Force Awakens storyline and characters. Not even the highest-grossing film since Avatar could get the franchise on sturdy footing. Later next year, in May 2016, Disney announced the discontinuation of the Disney Infinity franchise. This wasn't just a simple cancellation of a popular franchise. Disney also shuttered Infinity developers Avalanche Software and announced that Disney would no longer develop their own games, instead opting to license them out to other companies. You know, how Marvel had been doing it for years. A company ultimately has to worry about its bottom line, and making physical merch was difficult even for a mega corporation like Disney. Video games is that volatile of a market. It was a no-brainer in light of the DICE-developed Star Wars Battlefront, released the same year as Infinity 3.0, becoming the best-selling Star Wars game in franchise history. Licensing had delivered the goods, whereas in-house development had not. Not coincidentally, after the dissolvement of the Infinity series, we started seeing Marvel characters showing up in other games, like a new Spider-Man game from Insomniac and even a Guardians of the Galaxy game from Telltale. This would bring us to late 2016 when rumblings started to surface about the possibility of a Marvel vs. Capcom 4, which was ultimately revealed to be Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite at PSX 2016. And as a bonus, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was returned digitally to PlayStation 4. We've had to piece a lot of this story together ourselves. Again, we reached out, but were unable to confirm the nature of Capcom's new deal with Disney, and Capcom is not currently talking to press about Marvel Infinite yet. There are tons of rumors, but as of producing this video, not much has been officially confirmed about the Marvel roster for Infinite. There have been a lot of unverified leaks, but in an interview after the reveal at PSX, a Marvel rep said Marvel characters were to be primarily from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which may mean the diminished appearance, if not outright exclusion, of some of the most popular legacy Marvel vs. Capcom characters, the X-Men, like Wolverine, Sentinel, and Magneto, which would be tragic. Wolverine has been in every single Marvel vs. Capcom game, including Children of the Atom and Marvel Superheroes. This is notable in that it brings us back to where we started, with media licensing. While X-Men is one of Marvel's most recognizable IPs, they have noticeably drawn less attention to it lately, likely because the movie rights are still owned by 20th Century Fox. In the world of transmedia licensing, each product functions as a commercial for another product, and it isn't in Disney's interest to promote a competing film franchise. However, this is not a firm fact as these deals change. For example, Sony still owns the film rights to Spider-Man, but they were able to work out a deal with Disney to share him in both ventures, allowing him to appear in Captain America: Civil War, so maybe we'll see Wolverine after all. While we did our best to untangle legal jargon and shine some light on a labyrinth of NDAs, this story is still developing. March 7th, we'll see Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 released on Xbox One and PC digital stores, and we hope Capcom will be able to make other entries available on digital storefronts again. We can only hope that once Marvel is able to regain complete control over all its properties, things will loosen up and we'll look back on this story and just laugh. Until then, we recommend fight fans consider buying physical copies of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite if possible, because man, who knows? But if you have any info on where Marvel vs. Capcom is going in the future, let us know. For Grace Kramer and Derek Alexander, this is Past Mortem signing off. Thanks for watching! Stop Skeletons from Fighting is a Patreon-supported show and wouldn't be possible without the generosity of every one of these fine folks here. If you want to support us and help us make more video game documentaries and reviews, then pledge your support by clicking on the logo. Or just subscribe, like, comment, and tell a friend. Remember to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to make sure you get notifications when new SSFF uploads are happening. Check out our other videos, look for us on Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. Last time we made too few toys, this time we made too many toys. I don't know if that's Goofy or Banjo, but there it is.